Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Lamb Squish, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. Please go to the link in the description where you will find a link to the right and left-handed video tutorials, along with a written pattern and links to all the supplies you need. You will need the written pattern to complete this pattern. You'll also need Bernat Sheepy, one skein. I used this gorgeous color cottontail, which seemed very appropriate for a lamb, and you'll need a Bernat blanket Ogo. This one is the Hibernate colorway, and it happens to have all the additional colors we need. The palest color for the ears, the medium color for the face and inner ear, and the darkest color for the feet. You'll also need your standard crochet supplies like scissors, stitch markers, and a large yarn needle, and of course a hook. For this pattern, we're using a USL 8mm. First, let's take a look at the finished lamb squish. Here you can see how I use the Bernat Sheepy to create the body and the Bernat Ogo to create the ears and the face and the feet. Of course, there's a little bit of Sheepy back here for the tail as well. These pieces are largely the same as found in the bunny squish, so if you need to see the specific pieces demonstrated, you can go to that video. This video is mostly focusing on the assembly and the things that are a little bit different. This pattern starts the same way, worked from the top down for the body. We're just using a different yarn. The ears are the same, just placed differently, and the face is a repeat of the body, but just the first few rounds. The feet and the belly are actually the same as the bunny, and the tail is actually just a riff on the foot. So all the pieces are very easy and primarily made with half double crochet. Now the directions for the lamb squish are largely the same as for the bunny squish. The major difference is that we're switching yarn for the major portion of this pattern. Rather than using Bernat blanket or Bernat blanket Ogo for the entire pattern, we're using Bernat Sheepy for the really fuzzy portions. You can see how it gives that great sheepy look. So the stitches themselves are the same, so I'm not going to go back over all those rows because it's simply half double crochet worked into a spiral, and I've demonstrated most of those pieces already. But I wanted to give you a few tips on working with this yarn and then assembling your finished lamb squish. So again, we're going to start our pieces most of the time with this yarn with a magic circle for this pattern. So I take my yarn and I go over my finger twice towards me, and then I just treat it like I would any other yarn. The main thing is that you're not going to be able to really see your stitches. As you crochet with this yarn, you're going to need to use your fingers and your sense of touch just as much, if not more so, than your eyes. So we start this pattern, once we've got our magic circle put together here, with a single crochet. So after you make that single crochet, you can see right there, you can't really see the individual parts of the stitch, but it is a good idea to go ahead and take a stitch marker and just as best as you can, kind of stick it into the top of what you've made there. There we are. Then get that right back on the hook. And you can feel, if you look closely, you can see there's this cord really that sort of holds this yarn together. And that's what you're feeling for within those stitches. So to continue on around, we continue with half double crochets for this pattern. But we really do just want to use our sense of touch as much as anything. And then to try and make sure that you're in a place where you can concentrate a little bit so you can actually count your stitches. Again, with this stuff, it's going to be harder to count your stitches once they're made. So you can use your sense of feeling and your sense of touch, and of course, counting as you go. And of course, if it turns out you missed one, you can always stick another one in there. Nobody can really see your mistakes either. Just go ahead and take your time with it. Like I say, count as you go so that you make sure you get the right numbers. And another tip as well, when you start out with that magic circle, you don't want to start it out too much bigger than what you need. Try and keep it just your finger width so that when you pull up on that center there to close it up, it's not as much length to pull up through. So as you continue around, remember you're working in a spiral, so you'll always want to keep that first stitch marked, but then you can just continue working around. And with this yarn, you really do want to just take your time and feel for the top of that next stitch. Feel where you want your hook to go in and put the stitch in there. Probably want to take that stitch marker out of the way before it gets lost here, but do go ahead and transfer that up to that new first stitch of every round, just so that you can keep track as you're crocheting. Other than that, just take your time, make sure you've got a nice bright light, and like I say, use your fingers to feel for those stitches. It doesn't look like much, but once you can feel it, you really can feel those little strings. Now, the first piece you're likely to make is the body. You can see right here, I've made it out of Bernat Sheepy, and I've left a little bit of a long tail. Although I don't need the long tail on this piece, I'll use the long tail on the belly to sew it on. I always like leaving a little extra just in case. Otherwise, the stitches are all simply half double crochet with the increases given in the written pattern. So you'll want to make this big enough to fit around the majority of whatever ball or stuffing you're using on the inside. And then we have the belly with our feet. Here's the wrong side with my ends a little messier. Here's the side you'll see. I've got my long tail attached here for sewing on, and it's just like the belly that we made for the bunny. We just working this portion in the sheepy, and then the feet in the darkest color of our Bernat blanket Ogo. So when we work that last round for our belly, we work through the last row of the foot or the leg and through the previous round of the belly. Then it's all ready to attach. Now, in the bunny, I did have specific stitches for you to try and attach these to, but as we've established, we can't really see our individual stitches here. So just use your eyeballs and your best judgment and some of those stitch markers to sort of place these where you want them and then attach them as you go. Just make sure they end up nice and even where you want your lamb's feet to be. And of course, our lamb needs a face. To make this face, I used the medium color of our Bernat blanket Ogo, and I just repeated the first 5 rounds of the face and then of the body. I repeated the first 5 rounds of the body and then finished it off with our decreasing stitches there, the same ones we used for our body. So again, this is just our medium color of Bernat blanket Ogo, and then I used the darkest color to embroider on just a little bit of a nose and face here. These are safety eyes, and of course, you can use whatever kinds of eyes you'd prefer. A little spookier from the inside, but I always like to use these for my animals. And finally, we need 2 ears and a fuzzy little tail. To make the tail, I just repeated the first 2 rounds of the foot using Bernat Sheepy and finished it off again with a long tail for sewing. Gotta have those long tails on the ears as well, which are exactly the same as our bunny ears, using the lightest and medium colors of our Bernat blanket Ogo. But unlike our bunny, we're going to place them a little bit lower on the face or on the body to create that lamb look. So now it's time to get started assembling our lamb squish. I have the body piece here, and you're going to want to have a yarn needle with a large opening because we're using some thicker yarns. So you can use this sort of finishing needle or the kind with a plastic loop or whatever you have that works with these yarns. Then we're going to first apply our face. You can see here I left a long tail on the face, so I'm ready to sew it onto the body. And I've taken my body and I've just sort of squished it out. I've worked it from the top down, so I've got my opening at the bottom where I'll attach the belly eventually. So I can start out by basically just squishing it down and sort of centering it right there. I don't want it up too high. I want it really close to that last row, but I want to leave enough room here so that it's easy enough to sew on that belly. So basically just right above it. I've also placed it opposite the long end or the join, if you will, at the end of the body when I finished that one off. So then you can take the end of your yarn and put it on your yarn needle and simply start sewing it on. I like to use very simple stitches, and I also like to take a few stitch markers to help tack it down when possible. So I'll simply make sure that it's sort of facing upright and that it doesn't have a twist in it or anything, although you could certainly put one in there if you wanted to. And then I'll use my stitch markers to just tack it down. And I'm not worried about counting out the actual stitches it's attached to or anything like that because, again, we cannot see them with this yarn. So you can simply work your way around and tack it down a little bit so that it stays in place, and then simply use your yarn needles to start sewing it on. So once you've got the face held on with your stitch markers, we can take that end on our yarn needle and just go right on through to the back of our fabric or to the inside of our sheep. I like to just put my hands right inside the body here and pull it on through. We don't have to worry about how our yarn is going to look on the inside of our body. That's going to be all covered up and enclosed, of course. So we can just come right from the inside. And I try to just get under every stitch. So I go under one stitch right there. And I'll pull that all the way through. And then I will just find the next stitch and go in on that one. Then I will cup up in the next and down in the next. Basically a really simple running stitch, but it should tack it down really well. If you were making this to sew together and put together for a small child, you may want to take the time to sew this down even more. Again, none of my items are product safety tested for children under 3, so you should always use your best judgment. The next thing to add are our ears, again, made using the Bernat Blanket Ogo. So we want to add these approximately to round 7. We don't want them to look like bunny ears up like this. We want to kind of sew them on here on the sides so that they hang down like a little bit of a lamb. So again, you can kind of feel your way down for round 7 or sort of eyeball it looking at some pictures of lambs online and decide where you want to put your ears. The main thing, of course, is on opposite sides of the ball on either side of the head, and you'll want the interior of the ear facing forward. So you can use these little tail ends to sort of send those ends through your fabric and tie them on and see if you like the placement before you finally sew them on using your yarn needle. So when you go to sew down those ears, you can add a couple little extra stitches down here to sort of tack it down and really push them down a little bit if you like, or you can leave them flappy however you like. Finally, all that's left is to add the tail. So of course, we want to flip our sheep over and add that just an inch or two, just right centered there, right above where we finished off working, using its own long tail. Then we'll be ready to sew on the belly and feet. So to stuff today's lamb squish, I'm going to be using this pillow ball that I found by Fairfield. It's a 10-inch pillow ball, and one of the things I really like about it is that it has a zipper right here on the bottom. So if you need to, you can add more filling, take some filling out if you need to adjust it for the size of your squish once you've got your crocheting done, or you could even remove the stuffing altogether and fill it with micro beads. Whatever you want to have on the inside of your squish, this makes it nice and easy. Just go ahead and put your ball inside the body, making sure that the zipper is facing down towards the belly there. Then you'll be able to adjust that stuffing as you go if needed. So we take our ball and simply start stuffing it right into our body. Just take your time and get it all squished in nice and even all the way around. Okay, so now I've got my ball inside my lamb and he's looking good, but he still needs some feet and a belly. So we're just going to go ahead and pull up that piece and start sewing it all the way around. Now in the other squishes, I would have you match stitch to stitch. Again, with this, we can't see the individual stitches, so we can fudge it just a little bit. So what you're going to want to do is bring up the belly that you've made with those feet attached and get it lined up with your squish. And at this point, you can just sort of twist it a little bit, however you like to do it, so that you want to have sort of your face centered there between a pair of feet. Then you can bring back those stitch markers and start pairing up your stitches. Again, I'm not worried about counting out 1-to-1 on stitches. I'm just going to eyeball it and use my sewing needle to sew the pieces together. So I always like to sort of start out with opposites. We'll start at one side, sort of make sure that's centered on that side there, then come over to the back, try and make sure that one's centered on there, and just sort of work my way around, getting it set up really well with the stitch markers. Then I can simply whip stitch it together using my yarn needle. So now I've taken the time and put my stitch markers all the way around. I started on one side, hit the opposite, then I did the two sides there, and just sort of split the difference all the way around so that I've got it matched up nice and evenly. You can see all the little colors of the stitch markers there. Again, I'm not trying to count out like 1, 2, 3 stitches or anything like that. I'm just using my eyeballs and my fingers here to sort of match everything up. Finally, we've got that tail end still attached to our belly, so I went ahead and put that on my needle. And now we're going to whip stitch the belly to the body. So this is a little different than the running stitch we were doing when we were sewing the face onto the body. Now we can simply take this sheepy yarn and just basically whip through the two layers. So what does that mean? We've got it's attached to the belly. So I want to come over here. I'm going to start by going through the body layer and then just right opposite through that belly layer and just pull that on through. I cut a nice long length, so I'd have lots of length here to sew together. When I'm cutting my long lengths for sewing, I usually estimate about 3 times the length of whatever seam I want to make. So then we just move over a little bit. I'm not going to try necessarily worry about hitting every stitch. I just want to kind of feel what feels like a good distance. If you go through a stitch twice, it's not a big deal at all. We just want to make sure we get a really nice seam and take our time with this yarn. If it gets a little tangled because you've got your ends a little bit long, just try and pull them through a little bit like that at a time. And just work your way slowly all the way around. Then you can remove those stitch markers when you come to them and set those aside. And then, of course, weave your ends in when you're done. And just work your way all the way around your lamb squish. And that's how to make the Lamb Squish, a free pattern on mooglyblog.com. You can go to the link in the description for everything you need, or simply search for mooglyblog.com Lamb Squish. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.